So-Called is sponsored by loveboiseparks.org, which donates profits to support, promote, and preserve open spaces in Boise, Idaho. Use promo code SOCALLED for 10% off all your purchases at loveboiseparks.org.
There's that classic question, where do you see yourself in 5 years or 10 years? I think more fair of a question is, what kind of opportunities are you setting up for yourself at the moment?
This is Mark Wojcik, and I'm wondering, how's your so-called career? Welcome to So-Called, the podcast that explores the why and how of work. On today's episode, we meet Monica Pierce, corporate go-getter and freelance writer. When we met, I asked Monica to describe her work.
I have about 15 years of experience working in different industries, different functions in business. I'm basically a project manager by trade, whatever function that's in. I still work full-time from home, remotely, for an electronics company as a project manager. But obviously I've gotten into writing, which is a whole new track of my career, and kind of following a potential freelance ghostwriting career, and where that's leading me. So a little bit of everything right now.
What are you writing about, or if you have a particular focus, and what do you like about that work?
Yeah, great question. So I never, a lot of people who end up being authors and writers, it was their life dream and their life goal. I never actually planned that for myself. Like I said, I kind of came up through the corporate world. And I started just kind of blogging and sharing on social media a few years ago, kind of this working mother, what I call an alternative perspective. The name of my book, actually, it's called Leaning Out, an Alternative Perspective for the Modern Corporate Woman. So that kind of gives you a little teaser of what it's about, which we can definitely talk more about. But I started just sharing that message a few years ago, just kind of informally. And I really just got a lot of feedback from a lot of readers or followers, what have you, kind of like, I feel the same way. And no one ever kind of talks about this other opinion or perspective. And it was really kind of the way, as an author, I think you want it to happen, because it kind of happened organically and led me to write a book about it, really with the main purpose of just sharing this perspective with what I think are a lot of people who feel this way. And then, like you said, in doing that, through that process, I actually surprisingly fell in love with the writing process and just what sharing a powerful message can do for strangers who reach out and say, thank you for sharing this perspective.
You mentioned lean out. Maybe you can talk a little bit about that.
Sure. Yes, I'm living my message for sure. So I guess very first, just to summarize, in case anyone's not familiar, there's this term called lean in, and it actually originated from a book called Lean In by Sheryl Sandberg, who's the COO of Facebook. And without going too far into it, the book itself and the message is really empowering for women, especially women who find themselves with professional opportunity to achieve, to lean in, as it's used, to climb that corporate ladder. And I like to say, that message on its own obviously is not a bad one. That's a great message and something we can all support. I was kind of the target audience for that book. What I've found, again, as I started kind of blogging about it and sharing publicly, a lot of people, I think, uniquely in the corporate world, and I think specifically for women of kind of this generation, a lot of us actually feel obligated to kind of achieve as much as we can professionally, because we know we're fortunate, right? We know that millions of women and men fought for us to have the opportunities we enjoy today. And there are actually, unfortunately, still many women who don't have that opportunity, which, kind of, by the way, we do need to still make sure that everyone has the equal opportunity. But I think, again, there's this kind of this niche group of us that people aren't really aware exist, who we have all this opportunity, which is great, but we don't necessarily want it. But we're saying yes, and we're taking the promotions, and we're leaning in because we feel like we have to. My goal, again, with writing a book, literally was just to let others who find themselves in this kind of position, as I found myself, know that they're not alone. And it's okay to say no to these opportunities. It's okay to be grateful to have the chance to climb the ladder, but say thanks, but no thanks. Obviously, that takes a lot of soul searching and honesty with yourself to kind of admit these things. And that's what I kind of talk through in the book, through sharing my own experience of going through that kind of soul searching period of my life. And then being honest with others, I think, and that's where it's ironic that this book came out when it did at the end of March, in the middle of this global pandemic where, we put everything on hold to take care of our families and ourselves and our health, right? So it kind of, I didn't plan it that way, obviously, but it was very timely. So again, that's the goal of the book, is just, again, it's not to say that women shouldn't lean in or we shouldn't fight for women to have these equal opportunities, but just remind ourselves that it's a choice. And you're not like an anti-feminist if you choose not to climb the ladder.
You can find Monica's book, Leaning Out, An Alternative Perspective for the Modern Corporate Woman, on Amazon. Check the show notes at socalledpodcast.com for links to her book and other related content from this episode. How did you sort of enter the workforce?
So I kind of bounced around. I was in business development, program management, et cetera, with Lockheed. And then I actually, I was in Silicon Valley and wanted a taste of what else was going on outside of the big defense industry. And I went to a small software startup in Palo Alto, which was very different culturally. And again, I got to dabble in a lot of different areas of business, very different industry than defense. So software industry. So learned a lot about that. And then I that's about when I started kind of this, I don't want to be, the next Mark Zuckerberg or what have you. So I started to say, you know what, I don't really want to pursue this anymore. I found a company I work for now. We were Plantronics, very old legacy electronics company, but we rebranded. Now we're called Poly. And it's just kind of a better fit for me professionally in terms of, kind of we were talking about that deliberation. I've gone through this self-reflection, and now I'm actually very honest with my leadership. So my direct manager all the way up to my CIO, they know this about me. They know maybe they see more potential in me, but they know that that's not what I'm pursuing, at least not right now in my life. So they're not dangling promotions in front of me, which I'd like to think is because they know I'm not really interested right now. But yeah, so I found a good fit for me there. And then, yeah, like I said, I've been, the writing just kind of happened and evolved organically for me in the form of this book. And now just through the love I've found in that process, I'm thinking about doing more of that. So again, like we said, I'm straddling the fence right now, but it's kind of nice to have some options and kind of be open to what's going to happen career-wise.
How did you decide, I'm gonna not put pen to paper necessarily?
Yeah, fingers to keys. Yeah,
keys, yeah.
The modern version. Yeah, I think it was really around the time that, and I share a lot of this in the book, by the way. So just a plug for the book if you want to hear more. I kind of tell this story through, or this message through sharing my own personal story. I had kind of made that realization that I didn't want to pursue, this fast track Silicon Valley type job. I just wanted to do work and provide for my family and have the flexibility that allowed me to enjoy my family at the same time. I had very specifically, and I write about this in the book, one day I had an anxiety attack. And I've always been someone who's had anxiety in different forms, but it's never kind of physically manifested itself. And I was driving and I had my oldest son with me. It was the day before Thanksgiving. So I'd kind of been running around the house. We were hosting the next day. So I was definitely kind of stressed out. I started having a physical attack. Following months started going to therapy, et cetera, trying to figure out what this was. And I asked myself, I'm like, why am I having these panic attacks or what have you now when I finally feel like I've, right-sized my life, so to speak? I'd gotten the more appropriate job and I had started to kind of lean out, right?
Yeah.
And what I realized was it was kind of the saying thanks, but no thanks to the life I had been pursuing, or that, the lean in, the Sheryl Sandbergs of the world had always offered me. And when I finally just said no thanks, I think that's when that anxiety started. I don't know if it was because of like relief of letting go of that pressure that I had always put on myself, or kind of the gap that it left to say, okay, then now what? Then what will my life look like if I'm not pursuing those things? So I'll probably never know for sure exactly, but I know it was something about that period of my life and having kind of turned away from who I thought I was going to be professionally and kind of like we said, more deliberately choosing the path I wanted. So that was kind of the turning point, if you will, back to your original question, I guess.
Whether through writing or her corporate work, helping others has been a connecting thread throughout Monica's career.
I've always been fulfilled when like people say I've helped them, right? It's never been like the work itself. Like I have a friend who's a very gifted artist, and she obviously, to make something beautiful, like that's probably so fulfilling. Like I don't feel that way about, like we joke, like the spreadsheets I make or a project plan, but it's being able to ultimately help people. That is really the common fulfillment I've seen through the different roles that I've had. And actually, again, like as I've been writing and sharing this message, I get contacts from strangers who've found the message through my articles or my book, what have you, and they're saying, thank you for sharing this. And I felt the same way. I didn't know how to express it. I thought it was just me, etc. And that's that same fulfillment, right? So, and I think that's ultimately what everyone wants, is just to feel like we've done something of value or we've helped someone. There's this concept of immortality projects that I use throughout the book because it's kind of a nice framework to use for that kind of that deliberation you're talking about. And it's what it sounds like. It's what you devote your life to that kind of makes you feel you're leaving your legacy. And as I was kind of reflecting on this concept of, kind of leaning in, leaning out, my own journey, I think especially again in the corporate world, there's this automatic assumption that everyone's immortality project is their job. But there are other ways, there are other immortality projects. For me, becoming a mom with 3 kiddos, at least right now in my life, like nothing I do professionally right now is going to be more important to me, I think, than raising 3 decent human beings, right? So It's hard to put, formatting a spreadsheet before, attending to my child who's having a, whatever. So it's, again, I think it's honoring and starting to respect that people have other priorities or other immortality projects at a grander scale in their life. It's not to say we don't want to work and do something, fulfilling professionally. Again, that's what I think has been so interesting about the pandemic, because it's shed light on that, right? It's okay that there's other things in our life that are more important than our job, or especially again in the corporate world where that tends to kind of be the assumption.
Monica notes that how you go about achieving your immortality project is an ongoing process.
There's a concept of like seasons of life, right? So I think, maybe right now it's not the time for me to climb the ladder in the corporate world, but maybe, 10 years from now when my kids are hopefully out of the house, that might change. So as important as it is to kind of be introspective about what you really want for yourself, that's an ongoing process. Right? It can change over time. You don't have to stick with what you decide at any one time.
Career-wise or otherwise, kind of, do you have a next big thing that you want to do? I mean, you've mentioned a couple of things. Anything in the works or further out that you'd like to talk about?
Yeah, so I'm very much pursuing this ghostwriting potential. Like I mentioned, I did do one book for a client, kind of a CEO of a consulting firm earlier this year. And that's what, again, kind of got me interested, like, hey, this might be a great way to combine, my professional experience with my new passion for writing. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I'm starting to do that, building a portfolio. If, anyone listening is interested in writing their book and wants a professional to help them do that. So yeah, I'm learning more about the business of that, as well as, they call it the craft. Yeah. Immersing myself in writing, and I was going to writers' conferences and all that, but obviously those are kind of on pause. But yeah, I'm really looking into what that might mean for me. Giving me that fulfillment, like we talked about, the passion I have found for just the actual process of pen to paper or fingers to keys and writing that I've fallen in love with, as well as the flexibility it gives me. But yeah, I also love the day job that as I kind of described, I'm in a great place there still. So I'm kind of pursuing both until I see kind of which way my path takes me. I think a lot of times, there's that classic question, where do you see yourself in 5 years or 10 years? And I hate that question because I used to be the type of person who would tell you exactly where I was, maybe not wanting, but supposed to be. And I think more more fair of a question is, what kind of opportunities are you setting up for yourself at the moment? And that's kind of where I am, is if we're looking at an actual path analogy, I kind of have multiple little stepping stones in front of me right now that I'm kind of testing each one, and hopefully one will I literally visually kind of see it, and one will kind of light up, and we'll decide when it's time. But for now, I'm kind of feeling it all out.
Thinking of your career, what advice would you give your younger self?
Oh, man. Well, like I said, I don't regret the experience I've had, because I also feel like it's kind of a meant to be, or whatever you want to call it, if I am going to ghostwrite for, the types of books I'm looking at in business, leadership, et cetera, because I've had the experience in those areas of business. So I'm glad that I have that experience. But I think, maybe if I could have gotten myself to the realization that I got to sooner of, it's okay to say no thanks to the path that's been given to you and kind of forge your own path. That was obviously a big learning experience for me in my life. That was a big turning point. So, I think if I had had a sense of that sooner, or not as much pressure on myself from the beginning, it would have been easier to come to terms with that. But again, I guess the cop-out answer is I wouldn't change the experience I had. So makes us who we are.
So-Called is sponsored by loveboiseparks.org, which donates profits to support, promote, and preserve open spaces in Boise, Idaho. Use promo code SOCALLED for 10% off all your purchases at loveboiseparks.org. Our theme and transition music was composed by Roberto Cavaco. All other stylings are the sound of my voice. If you enjoyed today's episode, please let us know. Subscribe and leave us a review. So-Called is available on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, and wherever you get your podcasts.